I think the real interesting story for me in lieu of all of this is here, the Global Times reports that there is a new document to facilitate integrated development across Taiwan, and it outlines a future blueprint for its development. And the Western mainstream media went kind of nuts about this because they saw it as an attempt to reunify, but it goes against this narrative that China is trying to reunify by force. So it says one of the highlights of this plan includes the scrapping of temporary residence for Taiwan compatriots living in Fujian, encouraging them to purchase property in Fujian. So Fujian province is very close to Taiwan. It's literally across the straits. Yes, and seeking to include Taiwan compatriots in local social insurance systems so as to improve institutional guarantees for them in terms of employment, medical treatment, housing, and elderly care services. It comes at a time when Taiwan authorities continue to trumpet separatist rhetoric and act as a U.S. puppet to achieve the U.S. strategy of containing the mainland. So your reaction to these developments, because it shows a huge divergence that on the one side you have the U.S. preparing for a conflict, and on the other you have China seemingly pursuing peaceful reunification, and this seems to be a big step forward. So, Brian, your take?
Well, it's brilliant when you think about it. They're giving people living on the island province of Taiwan a stake in the mainland economy and giving them access to all of these benefits. And at the same time, the U.S. is encouraging separatism on the island of Taiwan, doing exactly what Ukraine did vis-a-vis Russia, cutting themselves off from their primary economic partner, which for Taiwan is the rest of China. For Ukraine, it was Russia. And so they're crushing the economy themselves on the actual island, while China is giving the people living on the island access to economic opportunities on the mainland. It's brilliant. It's a self-powering engine of reunification peacefully. And so the harder the U.S. squeezes to try to keep their grip on Taiwan, the more people on the island of Taiwan are going to see this offer by the rest of China as attractive. And then again, if the U.S. from 2014 to 2022 training the Ukrainian military together with all of their NATO allies, training the Ukrainian military, creating this corps of NCOs over 8 years, that whole force being wiped out by the Russian intervention, and then the next army wiped out, this current army they build up for this offensive completely wiped out. What do they think is going to happen to the much, much, much smaller military on Taiwan that is not going to be getting nearly as many weapons, and weapons that are more or less irrelevant? They're getting tanks. Tanks to do what exactly? And people keep imagining that China is for some reason going to actually invade, do an amphibious landing onto the island of Taiwan when they have more than enough missiles to scour the island of all military infrastructure. I mean, it's just another disaster in the making. They go from one failure to the next. They went from, think about it, from the Vietnam War to the Middle East, all of the places they intervened there, to Libya, a complete and absolute disaster that resonates even to this day, that flood and the thousands of people dead from it, and the surge of destitute people flooding into Europe to escape the disaster the collective West created there. And now Ukraine, and they're working on Taiwan next. What makes people think that this is going to work out any better than all of the other projects the U.S. has gotten itself involved in? And why is anyone in Taipei still engaged in this? How do they imagine they're the exception to the rule, which is wherever the U.S. goes, it completely destroys, and even the client regime that they put into power ends up on the chopping block more times than not.
Yeah, and I know you've been doing a lot of analysis recently on the expansion of the U.S.'s military footprint in the Asia Pacific. And I wanted to pull up a graphic on this because Taiwan, of course, is probably the big prize, the big cheese in this, or the big porcupine, we could call it. It's literally what U.S. defense officials like to, national security state officials like to call Taiwan a porcupine. But this porcupine is actually quite big because it surrounds all of China. Here's Carl Zha, friend of the show, saying China is aggressively threatening U.S. national security. And here is a photo of all of the, or many of the bases, whether it's an army base, air base, naval base, air station, or a new base of the United States surrounding China. So here is the People's Republic of China. And here is all of the bases going all the way from Japan, encircling China down to the Philippines, and of course the islands surrounding the Philippines, and Taiwan, of course, right here. So, Brian, can you give maybe some updates on the expansion of U.S.'s military footprint? I know there's been activity in Guam and the Philippines. So help us understand that graphic.
But to be clear, well, yes, they have a huge military presence all around China. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops spanning multiple bases in South Korea, all across Japan, on mainland Japan, on Okinawa. On Okinawa alone, there's a complex of bases like tumors dotting the entire island. And it really is like a tumor, just growing and killing everything good on the island. And now they're expanding into the Philippines. They had a presence in the Philippines. Like I've said before, they get pushed out at times by certain Filipino political leaders, and then they get invited back in by others. And so now is a time where they're being invited back in. There are the Batanes Islands. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but they're Filipino islands, and they're around 200 kilometers south of Taiwan. The U.S. wants to build a civilian port there, but why? For what? They're not the ones doing the majority of trade in the region. What is that there for? That is a logistics point that they will use for a future confrontation with China over their island province of Taiwan. So there's that. But building a port does not happen overnight. That's something that will probably take a few years to do. There was this agile combat employment doctrine that the U.S. Air Force is trying to adopt in the Pacific region. And what this is building more airfields, not because you have more airplanes, but because you're going to spread out your air power more than it already is, to prevent China from just wiping out a handful of air bases and completely laying waste to U.S. air power. So if you spread it out across more air bases, it's a little more resilient in a Chinese missile attack, although I don't think so. And again, this is going to take years and years to do, if they even decide to actually do it, and to what extent is still unclear. So they're trying to expand. I was just listening to the changing U.S. Marine Corps doctrine. They're in need of ships to maintain their ability to menace nations all around the globe, but specifically places all around China's periphery. And they don't have enough ships. They're going to have fewer and fewer ships as the years go on. So it seems like the U.S. has these ambitions, but they don't have the means to reach them. And I think that's going to, just by itself is a problem for the U.S. But then when you consider that China is still in the process of growing and expanding, enhancing its combat capabilities, and also the fact that China is focused solely on defending its shores within its own territory, while the U.S. is trying to project military power thousands and thousands of miles from its own shores. You could already see, again, just like with Taiwan specifically, or the conflict in Ukraine, or just ahead of the offensive, you can see the fundamentals do not favor the United States, but the United States feels compelled to push forward anyway.
Yeah, and there with the conflict in Ukraine, oftentimes what's brought up, I know Antony Blinken was just speaking at Johns Hopkins and kind of intimated to this, that one of the purposes of maybe keeping the Ukraine conflict at a steady point, freezing, sometimes they'll say. Of course, he wouldn't say that in a speech, but there has been a lot of talk about freezing that conflict. And oftentimes, some of the concerns, many of the concerns that come out of their mouth is China is not being able to wage a future conflict with China if their capabilities are wasted away in Ukraine.
Well, you know, a lot of people are saying that so far, I would say most of the capabilities that the U.S. has transferred over to Ukraine are capabilities they really weren't going to use in any sort of conflict with China. But with the ATACMS, now you're starting to cut into longer range weapons that the U.S. would be interested in using against China rather than wasting on a lost proxy war against Russia and Ukraine. And then they're talking about transferring NATO weapons. I saw an article in Forbes talking about, well, if you give them F-16s, you need to give them these JSON missiles, but JSON missiles play a central role in any potential U.S. conflict with China, so that I highly doubt they would give them anything but a token amount of them, if any at all. That's the thing we have to keep an eye on. If the U.S. starts sending long-range missiles to Ukraine to use in this lost proxy war, that is them cutting into their combat capabilities that they are trying to preserve for the war they're trying to provoke with China. If they continue to preserve those capabilities, then that does signal to us that they fully plan on moving on to China next, and they'll just cut their losses or try to either freeze the conflict or just perpetuate it the way that it's going right now. You know, Ukraine obviously isn't going to win, but if they could just prevent them from losing too quickly, collapsing, that could be a possible objective that they have. So we have to be very careful. As I've always said, the U.S. sees this as a window of opportunity that is closing. Many people would say that it has already closed, especially in terms of containing China. They think that if they do have to fight a war with China, and honestly, they don't need to, but in their mind, they need to, because they cannot imagine any other nation surpassing the U.S. and having the largest economy or the largest military on earth. They cannot imagine this because, well, we could talk about their ideological mindset and what guides all of this. This irrational foreign policy that they're obsessed with pursuing. But you know, the window most likely has already closed, but they're going to try anyway. They want to fight this conflict anyway, no matter how disastrous. They always see anything that they do, others are paying the price for it. Right now, they're fighting this proxy war against Russia and Ukraine. It's not their blood or treasure that's being spent. It's Ukraine's. It's not American territory that's being lost. It's Ukrainian territory that's being lost. They're very happy to continue doing that as long as other people are paying the cost. So if they trigger some sort of conflict with China and it stays in the Pacific, again, they don't see the price they're going to have to pay for doing that. So from their mindset, even if it's a long shot, it's worth a try anyway.
Yeah, and you know, I'm curious about your thoughts too on now the way that China is often portrayed in the Western mainstream media in relation to its, let's say, its stability, even its conflict readiness. So there have been a series, you know, earlier this year, there was the, demotion and removal of Qin Gang, the former foreign minister, and Wang Yi took over. And now there are rumors that China's defense minister, who continues to be under sanctions by the United States, by the way, for some bogus arms deal with Russia in 2018, But now Li Shangfu is reportedly under investigation and likely to be removed as well. And the way that this is always framed is that, as you see there, deepening turmoil within Beijing's military and foreign policy establishment. And, you can get the picture of how this is often portrayed, that China's in trouble, that China's foreign policy strategy is one that is failing. There are reports now that China's whole military strategy is about burning out the navies of its, of its neighboring countries, in response to what has happened recently. There was a spat between China and the Philippines, in the South China Sea, where China literally hosed them down with water as a measure of showing that this is a threat to our security, where you are sailing your ships, your warships. So, in effect, Brian, what's your reaction to the way that the mainstream media, the Western mainstream media, talks about China's initiative, security-wise, its national security strategy, etc., in relation to this broad war that you're describing?
It just seems like they're taking every misguided step they took in regards to Russia and just repeating it in regards to China. I wonder if China's Minister of Defense is going to share a jail cell with Russian General Surovikin, who's not in jail, by the way, but the Western media said that he was. And so we just need to keep in mind all of these stories that the Western media has cooked up over the years. I mean, Danny, you've been paying attention to this as I have. For the last 10 years, China has been 6 months away from collapsing, and it's still there, stronger than ever. It's surpassing the U.S. The U.S. is putting these sanctions on China. China is circumventing them. They're doing things that are supposedly impossible to do, which, no one, I didn't doubt China even for a moment. I knew they were going to be able to circumvent these sanctions and overcome these limitations the West was trying to place on China, because I actually looked at the fundamentals in China regarding their industrial base, their education system, and we knew that they were going to overcome these, that they don't need the West anymore. The West is soon going to need China and the multipolar world that they're building. So it's the West doing the exact same thing all over again. China is just a rotten structure. All we have to do is kick the door in and everything will come collapsing down. This is almost exactly how they construct their narratives together. It's an illusion. Their economic success is all an illusion. People in China are unhappy, secretly unhappy, and we can't get the statistics to show you or any of the actual facts to show you, but just trust us. And like I said, they've been saying this for years and years, and it simply isn't so. And wishing that it was so isn't good enough, unfortunately, for the West.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.